Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to chair this session, and I am greatly honored to chair this session. And as you all know, Korea has developed during the past half-century mainly based on human resources only. So I think it's quite appropriate for Korea to host Global Human Resource Forum, and I think this forum could have many implications and suggestions for other countries. I would like to introduce three very distinguished speakers this afternoon, and each speaker will spend about 20 minutes. And then Professor Park of Sungkyunkwan University would discuss for about 10 minutes. And then we would open the discussion to the floor, so it would approximately make up the 1.5 hour. We will start from Chancellor Wrighton of Washington University in St. Louis. I think most of you know how prestigious Washington University in St. Louis is. You know, Washington University has 22 Nobel laureates. So it is, I would say, about in the United States, it would rank about 25 on the top. Especially medical school would belong to the top 5. Is it correct, Chancellor? And we have close relationship with Washington University in St. Louis through McDonald International Scholarship Program, which Washington will support one graduate student from Yonsei for his PhD program. I think this program includes about 20 very important worldwide universities, so it would, I would say, represent one very representative international collaboration. And Chancellor Wrighton leads this program, and it would have great impact on the worldwide. I would like to first invite Chancellor Wrighton to the podium. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. President. It's great to be here and an honor to participate in the Global Human Resources Forum. This session is on innovation in higher education. What I want to speak about is, in fact, the McDonald International Scholars Academy that was just mentioned. The McDonald International Scholars Academy is an example of a new program, and we believe a model for a global university. But it is a partnership, and it encourages the development of talented people to emerge as leaders in academia, business, government, public service. What I'd like to do is to begin by sharing with you something about Washington University, our location, what we do. And if I could have the slides of my presentation, please. Recognize that man. Could I have the opening slide to my presentation, please? Thank title of this presentation is Preparation of the Next Generation of Global Leaders. And we use the McDonald International Scholars Academy to illustrate this new concept in graduate education, which engages us with international partners like Yonsei University here in Seoul, Korea. Not all of you will know where St. Louis is located. We're in the middle of the United States, near the banks of the Mississippi River. This is an image from an evening in July 4th. Almost every year it's this nice. We celebrate the independence of the United States on that night. And this fireworks display takes place with an image of the arch in full view. The arch is a symbol of the gateway to the West, which was an important undertaking at the time that Washington University was founded in 1853. This map of the United States illustrates better the location of Washington University, right here in the middle of the United States, in the state of Missouri. Washington University is confused with many other great Washington colleges and universities in the United States, but I reminded a few this morning that Washington University was founded before the state of Washington actually existed. So we've been there for over 150 years, and today we are recognized as one of the top programs in the United States. We're a completely private university. We have a very strong applicant pool. Indeed, our applicant pool rivals that of great institutions like Harvard and Stanford. Our 23,000 applications for just 1,330 first-year positions is as strong as the best institutions in the United States. Significantly, too, the quality indicators for the academic standards of our students are very high, and we overlap the very best institutions in the United States. Washington University has only 12,000 students. Half are graduate students and professional students, and the other half are undergraduates. We have approximately 110,000 living alumni and 12,000 employees. When you see 12,000 students and 12,000 employees, perhaps you think, well, that's why it's so expensive. But in fact, we have a very large clinical mission in our medical school and a very large research mission. And the medical school represents a very important part of what we do. Our total operating budget of $1.7 billion is very significant. The medical school is $1.3 billion of that. So the medical school is indeed very large, and as was noted, we have very strong faculty, as reflected in the numerous awards and honors that they receive, including 22 Nobel Prizes in medicine, chemistry, physics, and economics. We're a comprehensive university, and most of our students are in arts and sciences at the undergraduate level. But we have strong undergraduate programs in art and architecture and business, art and architecture being in the Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. We have undergraduate programs as well in engineering and applied science. Law, medicine, and social work have only graduate programs at the master's and doctoral level. Our university is one that is focused on the student experience, and we provide the very best for our students in environment, program, and we think opportunity. We provide opportunities for our students to be engaged in original research, and today we're at the forefront of research that has led to an unmanned exploration of Mars. The scale model of the Mars rover that you see on the right is just a replica of what's actually being controlled in the building to the left, which is in our Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. I think you'll all know that the exploration of Mars is yielding very significant scientific results, and we're privileged to be a part of that important project through the work of Professor Ray Arbison, our chairman of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. Education and research in the United States go hand in hand, and that's why I emphasize that even for undergraduates, knowledge creation as well as learning what other people know is important. Through the McDonald International Scholars Academy, we've launched an initiative that partners us with 23 premier research universities around the world. Our premier objective is to build understanding and cooperation among people and institutions of the world. We will be educating talented students from our partner universities as McDonald scholars. And beyond that, we will be working with important international corporations that need the kind of talented people that we seek that will be the next generation of leaders. Secondary interests of ours are to improve the image of the United States by working cooperatively around the world and to enhance the global impact and mission of our university. This is a list of the partner universities engaged in the McDonald Academy. We began with a focus on Asia. Indeed, this program was born right here in Seoul, Korea, through interactions of the leadership of Washington University and advisors drawn from across Asia. The advisors from across Asia helped guide us in the development of the program and helped us to identify premier research universities with which we would partner. In Korea, we partnered with not only Yonsei University, but Seoul National University and Korea University. We have 16 partners throughout Asia. In addition, we have 4 partner universities in the Middle East, 2 in Turkey, 2 in Israel, 2 partners in Latin America, 1 in Chile and 1 in Brazil, and 1 in Europe. This list of partner universities is clearly finite. We don't believe that we can develop strategic relationships with every institution of higher education. It's my understanding that there are some 8,000 institutions of higher education around the world. But this list will grow. We'll grow to approximately 30 to 35 and expand the number of McDonald scholars beyond our current 29. Here is a list of corporate and foundation sponsors for McDonald scholars. Multinational corporations, 1 foundation, mostly based in the United States, but 3 based in Asia. The Lee Foundation in Singapore, Charan Pakwan, a for-profit company in Southeast Asia, and the Vila Korea Corporation, based here in Seoul. Each of these institutions has a commitment to international higher education and to supporting a McDonald scholar in this program. The McDonald scholars are heavily supported with tuition, travel awards, and a living allowance. They are mainly spending time on their degree program. But beyond their degree program, we engage them in on-campus and off-campus programs to help them understand the United States, how we do business, our values, culture, history. We bring the students together, McDonald scholars, on a regular basis to help them understand each other, the part of the world from which they come, and the issues relevant to their region. We brought our first McDonald scholars on a cohort trip to Washington, D.C., and in the spring we will bring them on a cohort trip to New York. They take part in academic symposia, special meetings, and an important component of the McDonald Scholars Academy are the ambassadors. Ambassadors are faculty members of Washington University who are our liaison with our partner institutions. Our scholars live near our campus, and shown here are 2 of our scholars in front of a special residence that's supported by the university to accommodate the McDonald scholars. The program has been generously funded through philanthropic support, first provided by John McDonald, for whom the program is named, a former chairman of our board. Additional endowment commitments bring our total endowment now to $27 million. Our sponsors provide a support package for a scholar of $60,000 per year. So this is a generously supported program, and one that is very special. Our scholars are very special also, numbering 29 individuals. We anticipate recruiting a scholar each year from a partner university, and ultimately 2 to 3 scholars per partner. We'll have approximately 100 scholars at steady state, a small fraction of our 6,000 graduate and professional students, and even a small fraction of our international graduate and professional students. But these are very special students indeed, coming from the best universities from around the world, top academically, but dedicated themselves to learning more about how to become leaders. And it's these people that we will look to be the next generation of leaders in our institutions, in corporations, and in our government. We have a group of advisors helping develop the program. The leader of the advisory group is the Honorable John Danforth, former United States Ambassador to the United Nations and former United States Senator. The ambassadors today represent 21 of our leading faculty members serving our 23 institutions. Their key responsibility is to do what ambassadors do, and that's to build academic commerce. We're looking for strategic partnerships with each of our 23 partners. By academic commerce, we mean faculty and student exchange, cooperative education, cooperative research programs. The scholars themselves must be an alumnus or an alumna of one of our partner institutions, and they must be admitted to a degree program. They can be applying for any of our programs, from art to chemistry, business or law, science, social science, humanities. Our students are intellectually diverse and come from all parts of the world. The program on campus engages our scholars with many other activities on our campus, bringing benefit to our domestic students through the interactions that they have. Our Richard A. Gephardt Institute for Public Service, for example, recently convened a colloquium. Former Congressman Richard Gephardt, featured on the left in this image, and on the right, Murray Wheatonbaum, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors to the President. McDonald scholars did take this wonderful trip to Washington, D.C. Meetings were held at the Brookings Institution, an institution that shares a common benefactor with Washington University, Robert Brookings. We met with members of Congress, members of the executive branch, thought leaders, and of course our scholars who were engaged in sightseeing. Our scholars have been deeply committed to working with us, with our partner institutions, and helping us build these collaborative relationships. Our strongest educational program is an executive MBA program conducted cooperatively with Fudan University, which was recently ranked the #1 executive MBA program in China. But many other programs exist as well. And perhaps the heart of what we're trying to do at the moment could best be characterized by addressing global challenges, such as energy and environment. We held an important conference on our campus dedicated to considering how we might address, as a partnership, the challenges related to producing abundant and inexpensive energy without damaging the environment. We held a meeting on the Washington University campus that involved 12 of our partner CEOs, including the president of Yonsei University. We had over 50 international guests, and we did in fact come to a call to action by our university leaders. We will reconvene our group in Hong Kong in 2008. Washington University has seeded 14 collaborative research projects with our partners, and we believe that this illustrates well the kind of work that we need to do, not only to build the human resource capacity, but to prepare people to work on the grand challenges of this century. John McDonald, former chairman of the board of Washington University, has been deeply committed to this program. It is clearly a small program, but as I indicated, a model that can be used and replicated, a model that we believe will contribute to preparing the men and women of this era for leadership throughout the 21st century. Thank you all for listening.
I would like to thank Chancellor Wrighton for his very informative and stimulating presentation. I would say that McDonald International Scholar Academic Program would have long-standing effect on the worldwide collaboration. I am greatly honored to invite Dr. Mary McGaw. He is now the professor at the University of Melbourne and also director of Melbourne Education Research Institute. As you all know, he has been the Director for Education at OECD, and you may be familiar with the PISA scores for Korean middle school students taking math exam and score very highly. And he led the PISA project. And he just mentioned that when he asked to ministers for education around the world, most frequent reply was that higher education reform was the most urgent task. I think he would give us very exciting presentation. Please.
Thank you very much, President John, for the welcome, and thank you all. It's a pleasure to be back in Korea. I'm afraid I won't be talking about PISA results today. I rather like talking about PISA results in Korea since you do so well, but it's not for this session.
There is some technical problem, so we would rather start with Samir, Dr. Samir. He's from World Bank, and he's the tertiary education coordinator throughout the world. He is very much interested in developing countries' tertiary education, but he coordinates tertiary education around the world. And he especially focused on global networking for the tertiary education, and he emphasized information sharing among the higher education officials throughout the world. Dr. Samir, please.
Global HR Forum. And in fact, because I know there are so many knowledgeable people among the audience, I got a bit nervous preparing my presentation, and I thought that I needed some help. And sorry, it's not here. I seem to have another problem with the presentation. Or if they prefer to have a student loan, they will get frequent flyer mileage as they get their student loan. Much of the class, many students will be registered at 3 or 4 universities at the same time towards the same degree. Most of the classes will be through the internet or on the site through Second Life or interacting with artificial intelligence-moved computers. And if you don't understand one of the classes, you will dial a 1-800 number to get a tutor at Bangalore to help you. We will have exams with open textbooks and open access to the internet. To communicate with the students on a daily basis, university will send SMS. Of course, your degrees will become obsolete very quickly, so the duration, validity will be only 5 years, and professors will have to change their courses entirely every 3 years. The better students will be recruited even before they graduate, and those who stay and graduate, if they graduate on time, they will get a $1,000 reward. And once you graduate and you look for a job and you don't find a proper job, the university will have to reimburse you for the cost of your education. Of course, in the future, the government's contribution to the budget of public university will be only 10%, but university presidents will have very high salary, more than $1 million, but it will be linked to the ranking of the university. Of course, to make up for the lack of public money, you will seek donations from the public, and you will be so successful that within 3 or 4 months each academic year, you will tell the public, no more money, we are rich enough. In countries where English is not the mother language, young students will have surgery to cut the little skin that links their tongue to the mouth to improve their English language pronunciation. Obviously, I didn't have that surgery. And those of you who believe in the MBA, I'm sorry to tell you that, Chancellor, forget about the MBA in the future. It's the MFA that will be in, the Master in Fine Arts, because of the creativity skills. Now, if you think that I'm telling you science fiction stories from the future, these are all real life cases that I have seen here and there through my travels. And I think that they symbolize the revolution that higher education is going through. And the question we have to ask ourselves, is tertiary education ready to confront these transformations? And to start answering these questions with you, I have divided my presentation into 3 parts. I want to remind ourselves of the importance of knowledge. I want to talk about the changing education and training needs that result from that. And what are some emerging challenges that not only developing countries, but I believe even countries like Korea are facing. First of all, the importance of knowledge. Here is a slide showing that one of your major competitors, a big BRIC country like Brazil, had the same level of economic development back in the late 50s. But today, as we were reminded this morning, Korea is way up, the results of the Han River miracle, and Brazil is really much behind. And what is interesting is that the green line is where Brazil is today, but even if we try to estimate where Brazil would be, if they had invested as much in capital, human capital and labor, physical capital and labor as Korea, it would give us the red line. And the big difference, still the gap between the red and the blue line, is the fact attributed to the fact that Korea in a systematic way has applied knowledge for economic growth and has become, you have many firms becoming world leaders, whereas in the case of Brazil you have very few. You have innovators like Embraer with the regional airplanes or Petrobras, but it has not been diffused to the rest of the economy. In England, it took 1,000 years to double the yield of wheat. But with the Green Revolution, applying knowledge, in less than 30 years, and here looking at 2 countries, India and Argentina, that are global exporters of food products, the application of knowledge enabled us to double or triple the yields in 20 to 30 years. And now, the application of knowledge may help us save millions of lives. Here is the life straw, which allows you to drink any dirty water, even from a swamp, and it will be filtered right away and be safe. Or this new machine, the Q drum, which transforms the way millions of people in countryside, in developing countries, go and get the water from the well. Now it's even fun to go and use this device. And the application of knowledge is also important to save lives. Look at these beautiful looking mountains in Colombia, South America. But in fact, it's an extinct volcano. Everybody thought that it was a dead volcano until in '85, a scientist warned the government saying, I think there's going to be an eruption. Unfortunately, nobody paid attention to his prediction, and surely enough, 2 months later, it happened. There was a big eruption creating this river of mud that traveled more than 100 kilometers within 6 hours, got to the town of Almero and killed more than 20,000 people. And you may remember on your TV screen the supplicating eyes of Omeira Sanchez, this little girl of 13-year-old who was prisoner of the mud that has transformed into cement and who died under our eyes. Today, with the progress of science, we are much better prepared in terms of seismology, volcanology, climatology, being able to predict when floods, tsunamis or droughts will hit. And in fact, it's really unacceptable what happened on 26th of December 2004 in this region, where the tsunami hit and there was no warning system around the Indian Ocean as there was along the Pacific Ocean. In fact, it's only today, 3 years later, that in India now the system is ready to give advance warning when a tsunami has been detected. And one last point about the importance of knowledge, the acceleration of the speed of creation of new knowledge, which means that a lot of the existing knowledge gets obsolete very quickly, and we have to think in terms of the implication for the way we teach and organize our higher education institutions. So what are the changing education and training needs resulting from this evolution? First of all, we see that on the labor market there is demand for higher skill levels. Our colleagues from OECD collect information on salaries, for example, showing that in all OECD countries, for both male and female, the income gap between graduates of secondary education and tertiary education has increased, even though the supply of college graduates has increased, reflecting the demand for higher levels of skills. And are developing countries preparing themselves well? Again, comparing Korea and Brazil, we look at the education attainment of the adult of the population, 15 and older. In red, we have people who have only primary education, in blue, secondary, in green, tertiary. Back in the early 60s, Korea had the same structure as any developing country, where the bulk of the labor force had only primary education. But you can see the progress that your country has achieved, looking at the statistics for 2000, where now the majority has either secondary or tertiary education. Whereas a developing country like Brazil, even though progress has been achieved in terms of developing the education system, we still have almost 80% of the population with only primary education. Second, since we have a very rapidly changing world, education and education needs to train people to be flexible, to adapt to change. A very interesting study from two professors, one from Harvard, the other one from MIT, had looked at the evolution of skills in US companies. You know, in the 70s, when increasing use of robots and machines was made, there was the fear that human beings were going to be displaced or totally replaced by the machines. But what the study shows that it is true that for some types of skills and tasks, routine manual tasks, even non-routine manual, and even routine cognitive, where if something happens you can have, you know what the answer is, either B or C. There the machines can do much better than human beings. But there are two types of skills. One is expert thinking, the other one is complex communication, which are in much higher demand. Complex expert thinking being the ability to identify patterns. Think, for example, about the role of a medical doctor who has to, even though the doctor relies increasingly on sophisticated machines like MRI or CAT scan, still the doctor makes the diagnosis and then prescribes a course of action to cure the disease. That the machine cannot replace us. And the question we have to ask ourselves whether the education system prepares well for this expert thinking. And as my colleague Barry had expressed that, you know, what PISA does from the test administered by OECD is look at the ability to reason, for example, of a 15-year-old who are in school. And this is a scale of 1 to 5, and while Korea does very well on the PISA results, the other countries, even in the OECD, the average for OECD shows that 40% of the youngsters do not do well enough. And in developing countries, we have as high as 80 or 90% of the 15-year-old who don't master this basic reasoning ability. So that's very preoccupying in terms of this expert thinking. And then if we think about complex communication, which is the ability to convince, to explain complex notions, or to explain to people from different cultures, are we doing so well? If we refer back to what President Clinton said in his speech, or Mr. Holbrooke, about conflict and all the problems in society, I think we realize that we are not preparing again young people to become citizens who will communicate well in societies. And if we listen to the wisdom of our cousins, the dolphins, here's what they say about human communication. Although human beings make sounds with their mouths and occasionally look at each other, there is no solid evidence that they actually communicate among themselves. Then there is the need for continuing education. If much of the knowledge becomes obsolete, we need to be constantly updating our knowledge, entering its lifelong learning system where we will start to learn very young and we continue to later age. And here we have a less young doctoral candidate getting ready, 83-year-old getting ready to get his PhD from University of Florida. And in this context, my prediction is that the university of the future will be completely different and will have the shape of an inverted pyramid, where the traditional students who come from secondary education will be only a minority, and most of the students will be either graduate students or people going through continuing education courses. And if continuing education becomes so important, then what the skills that university needs to impart are more the methodological skills that will give us the ability to learn our own and also to unlearn those pieces of knowledge that are not relevant anymore. Which means that we will have to rely increasingly on new pedagogical approaches where you focus not on what the teachers think is relevant, but on the needs of the learners, of the individuals. And we will rely increasingly on new and collaborative interactive modalities where students learn on their own into working with the computers, or they learn working in teams, or they learn interactively from their peers. So as the University of Maryland, which is the fastest growing public university in the US in terms of distance education, tells us, welcome to class, sit anywhere if you have connection to the internet. Or you can study also at your own rhythm whenever you want. If you need increasingly, you will be relying on education technology, but it has to be done in appropriate ways. We don't want to experience what this pilot is going to discover, about to land on automatic pilot and he forgot to register his software, landing software. It is very important not to just get technology for the sake of having the most up-to-date technology, but to think about your pedagogical projects and to ask yourself, which technology is going to help me better to achieve my pedagogical goals? Knowledge today can be represented in many different ways, and that's where multimedia can be very helpful. And finally, the role of the teacher changes. It's not anymore the person who knows it all. The teacher becomes the guide and the facilitator, and the student gets out and finds the knowledge and has to learn what to look for, and when he or she has found the right knowledge to solve the problem that is at hand. I like this quote from Peter Knight, already 13 years old, where he said that in the early 21st century, people will be able to study what they want, when they want, where they want, and in the language they prefer electronically. Now, what are some of the emerging challenges derived from this evolution? I want to focus on 4 challenges. And in fact, as in life, as this street in Paris shows, all of these can be either an opportunity or a big challenge. I want to talk a little bit about world-class universities because I know that it is a topic that is much debated in this part of the world. I want to talk about quality and relevance. I want to talk about values and ethics, and finally about flexibility. But let me make an interruption since I have many people here as a captive audience. I have a property for sale. It's beautiful, charming, peaceful residence away from neighbors with a wonderful view of the sea, a grand period staircase, and lots of light. Anybody interested? Here is what I'm selling. I was not lying, right? It's just I want to make the point that very often when we present our universities, the art looks very beautiful, but then when you look behind, maybe the quality or the level is not as beautiful as it sounded. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a world-class university? I think it's an alignment of 3 factors: concentration of talents, abundant resources, and appropriate governance. And I've tried to show in this diagram how the 3 come together. If you want to have world-class output in terms of the graduates that you produce, in terms of your research, and in terms of your technology transfer, the regional engagement of the universities, you need to have the best students, and we had a good example from the Chancellor of Washington University. You need to have abundant resources, and you need to have good governance that allows you to be autonomous. You need to have enlightened leadership, a culture of excellence, and we need to have all of that together. And what countries need to ask themselves is whether, when you talk about world-class universities, are you talking only about research universities or also other types of institutions? What about world-class community college? World-class open university? You need also to ask yourself whether you can afford to have all your institutions to be world-class, only select institutions in one country. And I think it's very important to be aware of the risk of regional imbalances. In many countries, you find such a high concentration of the best universities in the capital city. And I believe that it is one of the problems in Seoul City, where you have more than 50% of the top universities, if not more. And for that, in that context, I want to share with you the story of a little village in northern Finland. It's called Oulu, 500 kilometers north of the capital city, Helsinki. In the middle of the forest, where there was one big enterprise producing paper and cardboard out of the trees. But the CEO of that company was a visionary, and he was worried about the future of the paper industry. So he challenged the government of Finland and said, if you establish a technology university in Oulu, I promise to invest in modern labs and convince other private sector people to come and invest in this small city of Oulu. And in fact, university people in Helsinki were totally opposed. They said, no way we're going to have professors in this small town. But the government said, that's not a bad idea, let's do it. And today, if you Google Oulu, you will see that it's a joint website for the city of Oulu and the university, because the development of both of them has been so intrinsically connected. Now, what was the name of this company doing paper products? You may have heard about it. It's called Nokia. And they went on to transform themselves and become a world leader in electronics. And today, 100% of their sales are from electronics, and they represent 20% of exports for the country. What are the factors of success if you want to engage yourself at the regional level? Of course, geographical proximity, but you need a shared vision between the economic entities, the local authorities, and the higher education institutions. They need to be articulated in a complementary way, and you need to have proper mechanisms for knowledge diffusion and commercialization. And they need to be able to produce a highly qualified workforce, have a strong teaching infrastructure. Let me share another example from the US. The state of South Carolina. Clemson University is one of these land-grant universities which was established by the state, focusing on agricultural and mechanical crafts. But then they realized that the region was changing very quickly, and in fact it now become the center for automotive racing with NASCAR, and also big car producer coming to that region, for example Toyota or BMW. So they decided to have an alliance strategic partnership with BMW with the goal to transform themselves in the first automotive and sports car research university in the US. Today, Clemson University is about 75 in the rankings, and their goal is to become number 20 within the next 5 years. And this is the dream, the design that they want to build. But it's also built within 3 years, and this is the car that the university president drives as a result of this partnership. Not bad, right? Second challenge, quality and relevance. To be able to face all these challenges, we need not only to transform the programs in terms of the content and the professional skills that will be imparted, but also the soft competencies, the ability to work in team, the ability to work virtually with people who are in different countries, the ability to work with people from overseas in the big companies where we have many nationalities represented, but also to be much more creative. In fact, if you interview the chairman of Samsung today, if you ask about the next generation of cellular phones, I believe his preoccupation will not be about the technology dimension, but the marketing, to how to make the cellular phone look cool, because for young people that's even more important than what they can do technically. In fact, you have now big designers like Prada in Italy working together with a cellular phone producer. LG has a chocolate phone, we have a black label phone, etc. So, do the universities prepare students well for their creativity skills? What does it mean? Learning to invent, to experiment, to think out of the box, to take chances, to make mistakes, to break the rules, and to have fun as you do that. Very often we still have a very rigid education where we don't allow people to think differently, and that's not good if you want to build a labor force that will be creative. A recent task force in the US has this plan for the world economy. The US will do the creative work, and the rest of the world can do routine work, either done by the machine or by the people. Do you like that future for you? The beauty of the knowledge economy, that anybody can have this scheme and think for themselves, we will do the creativity and the other one will do the routine work. But again, you need to have the rightly trained people, and there are many ways now to train more creatively. There is software to do, to work virtually, to bring out the best in the students. MIT is totally revamping its engineering course right now, because instead of starting with the theory, they want to start with concrete problems and build the theory through problem solving. My time is up, so I'm going to run very quickly. Just insisting on the importance of, in this era of science and technology, let's not forget the values, and I think that what President Clinton told us this morning reminded us about that. You can see the different dimensions, universities, but also teachable values, and you need to be flexible. Remember what happened to the dinosaurs. This is a slide from the last Congress of the dinosaurs, where the chairman tells the other dinosaurs, the picture's pretty bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we all have a brain about the size of a walnut. Now, I know that in Korea, universities do not behave like dinosaurs, but believe me, in other countries, I've seen universities trying to do more of the same, very afraid to change and oblivious of the changes outside their world. So, where does this leave us? 200 years ago, a math teacher visited a new school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he was so struck by what he saw that he wrote back to his wife that same evening telling her, "You cannot believe what I saw. There was in this classroom a blackboard and some chalk and clothes. I didn't know what to do with that." Now we all know that the blackboard became the main pedagogical support for the following 200 years. And the question today is whether the internet is going to transform education in the same way as the blackboard did. In fact, some people have predicted the death of the traditional university, the brick university, to be replaced by the click university. It may not disappear completely, but certainly now we have the brick and click university. And since I come from North Africa, I would like to finish with an anecdote illustrating what it means to compete in the learning society. In my country, Morocco, we have this graceful animal called the gazelle. But it has a very tough life, because every morning it gets up thinking, today, once again, I need to run faster than the fastest lion if I don't want to be eaten up alive. Now, does the lion have an easier life? I'm not sure, because the lion too every morning gets up thinking, today, once again, I need to run faster than the slowest gazelle if I don't want to starve by the end of the day. What does it mean? It doesn't matter whether you're a lion or a gazelle. You have to run. Whether you are a small university or a rich university, a university in a poor country or an industrial country, you cannot afford to stay put because your neighbors are running. So this is a tough world. I know it's not pleasant, this competition, but this is what we have to live with. And the important thing is to develop your own vision. Not have other people tell you what to do, but you take your own destiny in your hands, remembering the wise words of Seneca, the Roman philosopher, who told us 2,000 years ago that there is no favorable wind for those who don't know where they are going. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salmi, for your very innovative and future-oriented speech. I'm sorry for making Professor McGaw wait.
Slides on the screen, I apologise. The slides that were there were it was a PDF file, and I assume it was my mistake, and I must have sent them the wrong file. So I'm particularly grateful to Jamil Salmi for changing the order of going second while I went off and found the file. Is it about to be opened? Thank you very much. I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about the context within which the debate about higher education reform is being undertaken, and it's being driven by a growing recognition of the benefits of education. I want to show something about the increasing demand for education. Not every country is experiencing quite what Korea is, so I'll show you the international context. Then I want to speak briefly about the challenges in expanding provision, which is the agenda that most developed countries are now addressing. When we convened, when I was Director of Education at the OECD, we convened the chief executives of the education ministries in the 30 member countries. And among the issues they said they would be dealing with in the coming years was the question of what to do with higher education. They all understood there were benefits. The OECD had undertaken a study of growth in the 1990s, or in the early part of this century, that used the data for the 1990s. The OECD countries had differed quite substantially in their growth rates, and the member countries wanted to understand better what was the driving factors behind these differences. And the things they investigated were the ones on the board there. They looked at business investment rate, they looked at human capital investment, population growth. Some countries were experiencing population decline. They looked at variability in inflation during the millennium period. They looked at the size of the government sector, many expecting that if the government sector was large, economic growth would be low. And they looked at trade liberalisation. And one way in which they summarised the results is like that. Now, all of the countries is listed down the left-hand side. You don't need to read those. I want you just to look at the two around which I'm putting the red boxes. If you look in each of those boxes, there's a zero line, a zero vertical line. And in those two cases, for every country, the column is out to the right. Whereas in the others, investment share, population growth, variability of inflation, size of government, the factors had variable effects across countries. The only two factors that were consistently related to differences in economic growth across the countries were the extent to which they opened up their economies to trade and the level of investment in human capital. The OECD Economics Department summarised this with a fairly strong causal claim, actually. I'm a psychologist and I'm a bit more wary about making strong causal claims, but nevertheless, they said this: if a country were to increase by 1 year of extra education on average for its whole working age population, now think about that, that's the whole working age population having on average 1 more year of education. That would mean a whole lot more people finishing degrees, or a whole lot more people finishing secondary school rather than dropping out earlier. If that were to happen, GDP would rise by between 3 and 6%, or putting it another way, the rate of growth would increase by 1%. Now that's using a very rough measure. How many years of education have people had? Using the adult literacy study, which actually looks at the quality of learning, not just the amount, but the quality of learning, a group in Statistics Canada showed that those countries, if a country is 1% above the mean internationally in the reading literacy of its adult population, so if its adult population's reading skills are better than those of other countries to that extent, then they would have labour productivity 2.5% above the international mean, and GDP 1.5% above the international mean. And I've given you references for each of these claims, and that's in the full paper as well. Now that's for countries. For individuals, in the OECD's Education at a Glance, we document these regularly. Those with higher levels of education have higher employment rates. They're more likely to be employed. And there's a table giving those results for all of the countries. They have lower unemployment rates. They have higher average earnings. And they have a high internal rate of return. That is, now I'm not asking just do they earn more, but given the fact that they waited longer before they started to earn, because they studied longer, but they maybe had to pay for that study, so there were costs incurred. If they're earning a higher salary, they presumably have to pay more tax. If you take all of that into account and say, what is the benefit of getting that extra level of education, then they have a high internal rate of return. And I've given the most extreme case. In Hungary, obtaining a university degree gives a return of 23% for males and 15% for females. It's partly because there are very high salary differences between between university graduates and those who finish only secondary school. And even in Denmark, where the salary differences are not so great and the tax system is more progressive, that is, higher earners pay rather more tax, even there the rates of return are quite substantial, 8% for males and 8% for females. And Jamil Salmi made this point with respect to Korea, but it's true in general. These benefits have not yet diminished over time. The benefit of getting a higher qualification is not getting smaller in the OECD countries at this stage, even though more people are getting those qualifications. And you see that in the lower unemployment rate hasn't declined for people with better education, and the earnings benefit hasn't declined for people with higher levels of education. So it's clear there are benefits to countries and there are benefits to individuals in getting further education. And what that's turning into is an amazing increase in demand for education. Now, it would be lovely if we had good figures to go back 30, 40 years to see what things were like in the distant past. But in the OECD data, we have a way to get at that. Let me show you. If I say, what proportion of 55 to 64-year-olds now have completed upper secondary education, but no more, then that's an indication, roughly, of what things were like 37 to 46 years ago. Not exactly. I mean, some of them would have finished the equivalent of upper secondary education later, but that's an indication of what things were like. Now, I want you to look just at some countries. The one that's first is the United States. The one that's sixth is Canada. The one that's 10th is the Czech Republic. The one that's 18th is Australia, and the one that's 23rd is Korea. Now, let's have a look at what things are like more recently, and I'll show you the figures for 25 to 34-year-olds. Now, the blue lines, the blue dots, don't follow the red dots at all. Korea, which was 23rd, is now first. No other country has a bigger proportion of its population having finished upper secondary education. The Slovak Republic's gone from 10th to 3rd. The United States has dropped from 1st to 10th. The United States had a huge first mover advantage. It had more of its population getting more education before any of the rest of us. Many countries are now moving past the United States. Denmark's gone from 6th to 4th, and Australia's stayed roughly where it was, 18th to 19th. Let me show you the same figures for tertiary education. And let's look again at the United States first, this time Canada second, Australia 8th, Japan 13th, and Korea 26th. Now let's look what it's like amongst 25 to 34-year-olds. Canada's gone from 2nd to 1st, Japan from 13th to 2nd, Korea from 26th to 3rd. The United States has dropped from 1st to 10th, and Australia's dropped from 8th to 11th. So, while it is true that every country is increasing the proportion of its population finishing secondary school, going on to higher education, not every country is achieving that at the same rate, and no country is matching you, those of you who are Koreans. Now, what are the challenges in dealing with this expansion? What are the things that the education authorities in the OECD countries said they were worrying about? Catering for student diversity was one. If more and more people go on to higher education, how do we cater for the differences among them? To what extent should our higher education system pay attention to labour market requirements rather than more general education considerations? And how might we fund the expansion? I'll say just a little about that, but there is a whole session on that later in the conference tomorrow. Catering for student diversity. One question is, how different do we want our institutions to be? Finland created in the early 1990s, at a point of an economic downturn, a whole new group of polytechnics. Australia and the United Kingdom, on the other hand, had polytechnics and amalgamated them with universities and called them all universities. They both said, we've got a unified single system. Finland said, we don't want a system like that. They gave the institutions considerable autonomy, but they did not let the polytechnics turn into universities. In Australia, in Sydney, there's been 3 Sydney Institutes of Technology. The first one became the University of New South Wales, the second one became the University of Technology Sydney, the third one is still the Sydney Institute of Technology, but who knows when it will want to be a university as well. So you get this institutional creep, and the Finns have said, we don't want that. Switzerland has got a technological sector that's separate from the university sector. Not every country has done this the same way, but it's an important question for countries to decide. And the issue of institutional autonomy over system control is an important one. Finland, as I said, gave considerable autonomy, but nevertheless exercised system control to the extent of saying, you are an institution of this type, and you may not become one of that type. When I talk to my colleagues in the United States, they say, what do you mean system of education? We don't have a system of education. We have a market. Institutions differentiate themselves because they need to differentiate themselves. That's another way to do it. You have to have a large and vibrant set of institutions to do it that way. But that's another way to do it. The impact of international competition, I think, is going to be also important, because if on the one hand we are saying more and more people are in higher education, so we need differentiated courses, differentiated institutions, the press that's coming from international competition is to make institutions more like one another. Every country is wanting to get more institutions in the top 100. Because the reality is every country that gets one into the top 100 that doesn't already have one pushes someone else's out. But the pressure is to pay a lot of attention to the things that get counted in those Shanghai ratings of institutions. And if you've got lots of Nobel Prize winners, you do rather well. The University of Western Australia moved rapidly up the scale because one of its staff members, who was also one of its graduates, won a Nobel Prize in medicine. And he got counted twice, as a former student and as a current staff member, and that moved that university dramatically up the scale in 1 year. Labour market considerations are important, and countries often look at data like these that I'm about to show you. What proportion of students in our countries are studying science? There they are. And the country on the left is Korea. 40% of your students are in science, biological, physical science or engineering. No other country is as high as that. Germany's over 30%, but if you get to the United States, down fourth from the right-hand end, the figure's well under 20%. You don't see much from the United States until you get to business and law, where it's one of the highest. It's not the first. Hungary's got more, but it's third or fourth. Now, some people look at those figures and say, well, we need to shift students. Students are doing the wrong things. We need to make students do the right things. Well, what is the right thing for students to do? And how do you get them to change their mind? Sometimes people operate on the supply side. Now, that's happening in Australia right now. The government has said we want more students to study science, so what will we do? We will lower the fees for students doing science. We'll lower the costs. We want more people doing teacher education and nursing, so we will lower the costs. They don't look at the demand side and say, what is it that is drawing people to do science? What are the labour market benefits of doing science? What's the earnings potential if you study science as opposed to law? And it seems to me that that's where we need to operate. If we want people to choose some other field of study, we have to ask, what signals is our society sending about how we value that field of study. Chile wanted to have more people doing teacher education, and they dramatically increased the salaries of teachers, and they've made entry into teacher education much more competitive than it was, because they've sent a market signal from the demand side, from from the point of view of graduates, not the costs of getting the qualification, but the benefits of having it. And I just want to make a quick comment about the timing of student choice. One of the things I think countries need to think about is when more and more students go to higher education, we may need to think about delaying the choices they make. In my country, students wanting to do medicine for the moment have had to make that choice at age 18, go straight from high school into medical school. 5 of the universities have now said no. 4 of them did it a number of years ago, another one's about to do it. No, you must do another degree first and only do medicine later. Now that is a standard pattern in some parts of the world, in North America in particular, but I think more countries are going to need to think about delaying entry to competitive professional qualifications beyond the age at which students finish school. Funding the expansion. Here's how much countries spend. There's how much comes from the public purse, and there's how much comes in total. Look at the United States. 1% from the public purse and almost 2% from private expenditure. Look at Korea, 0.5% from the public purse and almost 2% from private contributions. The only other countries that have got a relatively high proportion from the private sector are Japan and Australia. The end result is, what proportion of the costs of higher education are public? There they are. What proportion is private? And you can see Korea at the right-hand end has the biggest proportion of private funding of higher education among the OECD countries. The United States is next, Japan is third, Australia is fourth, and many countries have this. Now, I'm not saying that public or private funding should be one way or the other, but this is part of the way in which countries are managing the expansion. If it's private funding, if students have to pay, then we have to worry about the equity question. If they have to pay high fees to enter a course, that may cause them to self-exclude from the course. Now, I'll say no more about this other than to make the observation that we could lower the barrier to entry if we delayed the cost and reduced the risk. If we said you don't pay until you graduate and you don't pay if you don't get a benefit. The government might carry the risk of you not getting the benefit. So if we can lower the cost, delay the payment and reduce the risk, then there's no reason why a private contribution should constitute a barrier to entry. There's going to be a huge amount of experimentation and innovation in higher education. I think there's going to be much more private involvement, not just in payment, but in provision. There's going to be much more cross-border provision internationally, and these are exciting times for higher education institutions.
Thank you very much, Professor McGaw. Based on his very wonderful experience at OECD as Director for Education, he showed us very analytical presentation of higher education based on very detailed statistical evidence. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I would like to ask Professor Park of Songyun University to comment, but I am very sorry that we are running out of time, so Professor Park, would you please?
I would like a couple of questions to the speakers. First one is one of the interesting topics all of the university nowadays is globalization. And the programs for the McDonald International Scholar Academy, that is one of the networking systems of the Melbourne universities. And certainly it is one of the model, but the actual efficiency of the special field, such as MBA program or information technology, some university has a networking between intercontinents, such as in MBA program. The MIT Sloan School has networking with Samyang University in Korea, and Samyang University in Korea has networking with Beijing University, and MIT, Samyang University, Beijing, and Tokyo University. We associate the MBA program similar to the Wrighton School associate with the Fudan University and other intercontinental universities. So this kind of international alliance of specific field is very efficient in education and with the mutual benefit. Even they develop the dual degree program or common degree programs. They studied Korea 2 years, and the 2 years for United States, or 2 years in United States, and 2 years in China, and they got the both degree. So it is very efficient education program in multi-international system. How do you develop your McDonald International Scholars Academy? You plan to develop this kind of program to multinationally in specific field, in your specific area, such as chemistry or information technology. That's one of my questions to President Mark Wrighton.
Our McDonald International Scholars Academy is a program that will encourage both bilateral relationships and multilateral relationships. And we hope to inspire relationships that may not even involve Washington University, but involve institutions who have common interests. And we're working right now to develop a whole host of collaborative research projects and educational programs related to energy and environment. We funded 14 collaborative projects now, which will help us build relationships with faculty and students in our partner institutions. Through those kinds of programs, I think we can contribute to building understanding and certainly cooperation, and we hope to attract the interest of our respective governments and corporations who hold common interests. And you're right, it'll be around important needs, but if you think about the global challenges we face, energy and environment, overcoming poverty, advancing human health, producing food, clean water, an aging population, international security, these are all areas where research universities are going to play an important role.
Thank you. My other question is to the Dr. Jamil and Dr. McGaw. In Korea, during the last 30 years, our tertiary education system is expanding very widely. As an example, more than 80% of students are educated in tertiary education or higher education. The problem is the mismatching of the labor demanding and the skill demanding. But the university is always expanded as same field, very diverse area. And it caused a lot of challenges for the higher education process. So nowadays, governments try to control to the university to reform based on the market demanding. But you think which one is more efficient, such as market control education system or government control education system. So, of course, we have many experience in all of the wide world, so it might be the good suggestion to the Korean society that in Korea, the government demanding is much strong, like the government control. But the actual action control might be the market control. So we do not have really good idea. So we may have very good experience of
government control can be very effective. I mean, it can be made to work, but an important question is it very fair? You think about it like this. Some governments say, too many people are now going to university. They should be going to some other kind of institution. They should be going to some kind of technical institution to develop a different set of skills. Now, the way that we'll organise that is we'll simply reduce the number of places available in universities and force some to go elsewhere. If you do it that way, you can make it work. You can have fewer go to university by simply not letting people go. And that's what's done in some places. Countries control the enrolment in universities. But I think a more important question that has to be asked is, why is it that students don't want to choose the other options? Politicians often tell young people in Australia, there are better things to do than go to university. But if you look at what their children are doing, they're all going to university. So this is a good solution for other people's children. So you have to address the question of why is it that people don't want to go there? What are the benefits? If society wants people to get those kinds of skills, society should make the acquisition of those skills attractive. If we want something, we have to manipulate it in terms of the rewards, not in terms of the controls, in my view.
Experience in the past 56 years has shown that centrally controlled economies did very poorly at predicting the new jobs and then producing the graduates to correspond to these jobs. But even if we thought that we could do it better, it's much more difficult today because we don't know what tomorrow's jobs are. If you look at job ads in the US today, the one which comes on top in terms of demand is webmaster. Before 1993, that job didn't exist. So the challenge for those of you who are managing university or higher education institutions in Korea or other countries is, how do you train for jobs that nobody has identified yet? So I think two things are important. One is to have feedback mechanisms so that you can identify very quickly where there are gaps. Different mechanisms which are sometimes called labor market observatories, and then the ability, that's why I made this point about flexibility earlier in my presentation, the ability to react very quickly. In the US, in the past few years, a very interesting phenomenon happened. Nursing, training for nursing, for example, was done in public universities. But then with reduced budgets in most of the states, universities stopped training for nurses. And all of a sudden, there is a shortage. But to start reintroducing a program when you are not flexible is difficult. And new providers, for-profit, private institutions, have within 6 months been able to mount training programs for nurses to go through the very strict accreditation because it's medical domain and to take the lead there. So I think that what is important, that I don't think it's possible to decide which jobs you have to train for and to impose it. 3 weeks ago I was in Azerbaijan where the Minister of Education controls not only how many students public universities can have, but even for the private universities, how many students they enroll and in which discipline. And I don't think that it's going to work. So flexibility and having very rapid feedback mechanisms from the labor markets, from the employers, I think it would be much more effective than having to have central command for these issues.
I think we have a lot of questions and we may have a lot of discussions. However, we are behind the schedule, so my discussion will be closed. So, Chairman will talk.
We are behind the schedule, but since I promised at the beginning, I would like to just receive just one question from the floor. Please.
하이 에듀케이션을 바라보는 개념이 무엇인지 제가 세 분 정치를 묻고 싶고요. 하이 에듀케이션의 반대 개념이 뭔지 저분들이 하신 말씀을 다 종합을 해보면 이게 기술적으로 사회의 요구와 거기에 맞추기 위한 공급적으로 많은 말씀을 하시는데 인성하고는 어떻게 연결되어 있는지 하이 에듀케이션의 가장 큰 요소가 저는 인성이라고 생각하는데 거기에 대한 언급이 없어가지고 그 질문을 좀 드립니다. 답변 부탁드립니다.
Maybe Chancellor Wrighton, would you please respond to his question? He's asking about kind of personality building curriculum. He seems to emphasize liberal education.
If I understand the question, what role do institutions of higher education play in developing people, communication skills, networking skills? In fact, this is one of the most important reasons one shouldn't take too seriously the demise or the predicted demise of the traditional university. The residential college experience, especially in institutions where there's a diverse group of people, different countries, men and women, of course, people of different races and cultural backgrounds, different circumstances in their family with respect to financial well-being. Bringing people together from these very different backgrounds, learning together, learning a lot from each other, brings about a very special, life-changing experience. And I think it's important to understand that throughout the world there are a diversity of academic institutions, and they each have their own mission. And one of the points made by a fellow panelist is that institutions have a degree of autonomy, but also a degree of central regulation. And both are important. And I think the development of people in a setting where they're learning together and learning from each other in a diverse environment is an exceptional experience. Learning from each other is one of the most important and rewarding kinds of educational experiences.
Thank you, Professor McGaw.
I'll give a short answer by using an illustration. In the institution in which I now work at the University of Melbourne, there are still 96 different undergraduate degrees, some of them very narrowly focused in a particular area. The university said, let's replace those 96 degrees with one degree, a Bachelor of Arts and Science. So every student in the university will study arts and science. That turned out to be a little too radical. They reduced from 96 to 5. And in every one of those 5 degrees, students have to study outside their main faculty as well. So there is a breadth requirement. The science students have to study some of their courses outside the science faculties. So it's a way of saying, addressing your question in part, that along with the building technical skills, there are other broader things students should be learning.
Dr. Salmi.
another illustration, but reaching the same conclusion. A few years back, I visited the University of Hiroshima. We had an event, like today's event, and the mayor of Hiroshima opened the meeting by reminding us that what happened in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, if we put it in the context of mankind's history, it was the worst example of the application of science and technology. And as we talk about the knowledge society, about trying to increase the proportion of students who go into science and technology, etc., we have to remind ourselves that one of the very important missions of higher education institutions is also to impart positive values, and that will allow students to exercise their profession with good ethical dimensions, and also to become good citizens, and not only citizens of their country, but responsible global citizens.
I think we have a wonderful group of very distinguished speakers this afternoon, and Chancellor Wrighton showed us how one of the best American university is doing in international collaboration by using the McDonald International Scholar Academic Program. And the Director McGaw showed us the very detailed analysis of higher education